to another episode of the Everything But Perfect podcast. I'm your host, Jerica Hirsch, and I'm so excited that you guys are here joining me for another episode. Today, we have on a very special guest. Her name is Heidi. She is the author of a book called Audacious. Today, we are going to be jumping into a little bit about her book, actually, a lot about her book and just who she is, her testimony. And then she's also going to be giving some advice that she would give to her 20-year-old self. So that is going to be very beneficial for all of us girls in our 20s to listen to. This episode is so beautiful, you guys. And I was so worried because this is the episode that, in fact, went missing. I did share that on my last episode that I uploaded, how I had recorded this episode and it was nowhere to be found. And I know I pressed record and I know that I wasn't going crazy, but when things like that happen, you really start to question your sanity because I was like, where did that episode end up going? Like, we recorded it. It can't just disappear into thin air. Well, it did for about 6 days. And then God recovered it. That's the word, recovered. He recovered it. And it showed back up in my recordings. So that was just such a big blessing. And I was listening to it back, editing it. And I was like, this episode is so good. It is so good. And I cannot wait to share it with them. So without further ado, let's jump into the episode. Welcome on the podcast, Heidi. I am so glad that you're able to join me for a conversation all about your book and who you are. If you just want to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Jerica. I'm Heidi. I am 30 years old and I am a writer, a life coach, and I'm an author as well of a book called Audacious, all about praying boldly. I am located in Minnesota, but I did spend about 7 years living out in Portland, Oregon. So half my heart is in the Midwest, half of it is on the West Coast. But I'm really excited to be here today.
Awesome. Do you want to jump into sharing your testimony?
Sure. Yeah, let's get into
Let's
it.
do it.
Okay, cool. Diving right in. Yeah, so I grew up in a household that was just so kind and so loving and so Christ-centered. What's really unique for me is that my mom and my dad are both pastors. And so it was a really unique upbringing, and just our whole life was really centered around church, going to church together on Sundays. And me and my older sister would, spend our evenings at the church when my parents had meetings, and we would do our homework in the lobby and all of this stuff. So for a lot of us, or for me and my sister and me in particular, my upbringing was really centered on, okay, how can I be involved in a church? And God was always a part of my life. And my parents, they were pastors together at the same church. And when I was about 16, they both felt this call to go and pastor at different churches. Nothing wrong, nothing like that, just this call from God to go and be at different churches. And when I was 16, it just really kind of just wrecked me in a lot of ways. The thought of life could change and this thing that I was so familiar with, and how I encountered God and how I connected with my family and connected with that church, all of it just could change so fast. I didn't really like feeling like, the thing that I knew and the thing I was really familiar with could all of a sudden shift. It was made me really uncomfortable.
Kind of shook up your whole world. Yeah.
Yeah. As a 16-year-old, you're kind of like, oh, this is what I know and this is what I'm familiar with. And it was kind of like the first time when you realize, like, oh, I could have a plan, but it doesn't always work out the way that I planned it to.
Yeah.
And so when I was a junior in high school, that was really through that experience, I had to start seeing, like, okay, who is God outside of church? Who is God outside of this one church that I knew?
Yeah.
And what is my relationship with him when I'm not going to a church where my parents are the pastors, and I'm not going to a church that I really know everybody and I feel really involved and connected? What does God look like outside of the four walls of a church?
Totally.
I really had to start wrestling with that when I was 16.
And so it was like your whole routine, like everything that you had known. Because I feel like that's how we are sometimes, is we put God into a box with our routine. Oh,
Yep.
we wake up in the morning and we have Bible time for 15 minutes before we go to work and then church on
Yep.
Sundays. But God doesn't necessarily fit into these boxes and into these routines, and he shouldn't. But as a
Totally.
16-year-old, when that's all that you knew, it's like, well, now
Yeah.
what? Like, what does God
Yeah.
actually look like to me? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so I remember those last 2 years of high school for me, there's a lot packed into that experience, right? Of just family, our family navigating that and church navigating it and my relationship with God and figuring it all out. But that was really the time where I started seeing like, oh, I'm actually choosing to read the Bible on my own. And I'm
Yeah.
actually like asking these big questions about God and wanting to find an answer to them. And I really just started seeing like, I have to choose this for myself. It's not something that I'm going to be able to just kind of like tack on um, with my family and how our family was oriented with my parents both being pastors. And so then I went to college, and that was where I really just like continued to dive into my faith. And I think really started seeing more of like, what does an actual relationship with God look like when I'm going through more change and when I'm going through more transition? How am I actually
Yeah.
choosing to like cling to and be in a relationship with God?
Yeah.
And so I would say really between like 16 and 20 was when I was those 4 years, I would say are like kind of my testimony of that's when I really got to
Mhm.
know God, build a relationship with
Mhm.
him, and started to feel more of like the things I felt him calling me to.
And those are
And
very
just,
formative years as well. Yeah.
yes, so
Like
formative.
later high school, early college, like yeah. So
Yeah.
that's great that you were instead of, because I feel like a lot of people in those years
Hmm.
aren't looking for God necessarily, and making
Yeah.
it a priority. So I mean, sure that I'm generalizing here, but at least for my experience, like people are just excited to be in college and to move away from home so that they can, like party and go out and everything, but you were seeking like God and reading your Bible. So that's really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think I really saw that with the people that I was being surrounded with. I, um, in college, just got plugged into a great group of girls and a great, just like Christian community at the school that I went to, and also worked as a Bible camp counselor in the summers. And so I just had these like two really great Christian communities that I was
Yeah.
involved in. And I think what I would say is like I was really grateful for those years, like 16 to 20, right? Like junior in college to junior, or junior in high school to junior in college. Like great, really fun. And there were also like a lot of trials in that. There's a lot of hardship, but I felt like everything was so new at that point with God. And so I think when I, think of this phrase of like, what's your testimony? I can narrow down to those years, but being someone who is on the other end of my 20s, being 30, it's like, okay, there's a lot that actually, a lot of life was lived between ages of 22 and 29. And so what I would add to that is kind of all this, almost this like extension of a testimony, right? Of like, if you're considering your testimony of like, this is how I really came to know Jesus, this is when I committed my life to him. I would say it was my mid 20s when I really said, like, I'd started seeing more and experiencing more just like challenges and more things where they're just really like hard for me of like, oh, I have to choose who I'm going to be in this situation, or wow, I didn't expect that hardship, or I was 23 and living across the country from my family. There's just like so many little things that you navigate.
Yeah.
And I think in that, it was my mid 20s when I finally was like, wow, I can really see how I am choosing to follow God right now. And I've also noticed that I have felt like it could be easy to choose not to be trusting God in this. It could be really easy to just be like, I've got this, I've got it under control. So it was in my mid 20s when I actually finally said, like, no, I'm kind of drawing a line in the sand right here. And I'm saying, I'm following God. Like, I'm not
Yeah.
even going to let the enemy try and tease me with the idea that I could not follow Jesus right now. It's just like, no, this is the line in the sand. This is what I'm doing, and this is what I'm going forward with. And so that's kind of like the whole extension of your testimony, right? Of, okay, I lived some more life after I really got to know Jesus and committed my life
Mhm.
to him. And then there was another moment where I just said, no, like this is for real. Like I've seen more and I've lived more life, and I'm choosing Jesus again. I'm choosing just to continue following him. So
Yeah.
I would say that's like big picture my testimony. I think knowing that like I've known God throughout my life, but I've had to also choose him and continue to choose him. Because I
Yeah.
think that it can be really easy to think of following God as this like soft and romanticized and really like gentle thing. God is so gentle. God is so kind. But following him takes a lot of resiliency and a lot of grit. And so I think can't always like pinpoint it right to one moment. For me personally, I can't just pinpoint it to like one moment. This was God. That's my testimony. It's like, oh, I've
Sure.
seen him throughout my whole life. And
Yeah.
following him is continually taking that commitment and that unwavering like belief and trust in him,
Yeah.
and bringing it into all areas of my life.
Awesome. I love that you use that word choice because I feel like something I've been really noticing as I'm getting further into my 20s is that your 20s is such a confusing time in life. Like when you were saying that you have to choose every single day, like, no, I'm choosing to follow God. I'm
Mm-hmm.
choosing to not only follow God, but to surrender my life to Him. That's something that
Mm-hmm.
I'm like really struggling with at this point in my life, being
Yeah.
23, and being, out of college and trying to navigate next
Yeah.
steps in life and what I want my future to look like. I feel like I have these ideas in my mind and I try to hang on to them so tightly. And I'm like, no, this is how my life is gonna go. But I'm realizing more and more that like, no, God's gonna, make my life happen the way it's
Yeah.
supposed to happen, the way that He has planned, not that I have planned. And I have to
Yeah.
loosen up my grip a little bit and I have to be open to
Mm-hmm.
Him, and His will for my life. And so it is such a choice that you have to make every single day. And it's not
Yeah.
easy. Like it is not an easy choice because it is so much easier to just want to take your life into your own hands. Like you were just
Yeah.
saying, like, I want to just take my life into my own hands and be like, nope, this is what I'm doing. This is my timeline. This is gonna be my salary. This is where I want to live.
Yeah.
Um, because it's less scary. It's less scary than
Mm-hmm.
surrendering fully and being like, have your way with it. So that's what we're
Yeah.
supposed to do. So I've just been really learning that, especially this year and last year, 2021 and 22 were huge years for me to really make that choice every single day to surrender, and to live a life like
Yeah.
God wants me to live. It's tricky, but
Yeah.
it is a choice, like you said. So I love that you use that word. And then I also wanted to say that I love how your testimony is kind of like you've known God your whole life.
Mm-hmm.
Because I feel like a lot of those big testimonies that we hear, um, maybe it's a motivational speaker or a pastor or people on a podcast even. And
Yeah.
you hear these testimonies and they're crazy testimonies. Like they're
Yes.
just absolutely wild and they're like, I like should have died in this car accident, but then like I saw God's face and I was healed or I was healed of cancer, all of these
Mm-hmm.
healings and breaking chains of addiction and abuse and things like that. And I oftentimes like sometimes I get discouraged by that because I'm like, my testimony is nothing like that. I haven't had
Mm-hmm.
that time in my life yet that's like that come to Jesus moment, where
Mm.
it's like you just are living one way and then all of a sudden it's like Jesus shows up and you're a totally different person. I haven't had that
Yeah.
because like I grew up in the church. So my
Mm-hmm.
testimony, it's been just super like consistent. I've always believed in God. Um,
Yeah.
and sometimes I feel like behind because I haven't had that big
Yeah.
moment yet where it's like, no, like I don't know, does that make sense at all? It's like
Oh, totally. Yeah.
you get it.
I
I hope
hear
that you
that.
understand what I'm saying. Like I feel like without that huge testimony, it's almost like my my relationship with God isn't as strong as other people because I didn't have a near-death experience. Or,
Yeah.
I wasn't like released from the chains of something, right? Like these powerful testimonies that
Yeah.
you hear, I feel like I don't have that. Um, but I also
Yeah.
feel like our testimonies where it's like we've consistently been like trying to find Jesus and striving for that, making that choice every single day.
Hmm.
I feel like that is just as much of a powerful testimony as like those huge come to Jesus moments are. But
Yeah.
oftentimes it's like
Totally.
it's your testimony, it's like, oh, I just wish that like I would have that moment, where
Yeah.
you just see Jesus like so clearly. I hope that that made sense, that entire spiel that I just did.
No, it did. It totally did. I think I'm glad that you said that too. I think that that was something that I don't know, I don't want to say I was like self-conscious about, but I feel like I was always aware of it in my like late teens, early 20s when I started. Yeah, I feel like I was just more aware of it, of like, oh, there's these people who have these like really radical testimonies of this like really you were going in one direction and Jesus got a hold of you and just turned you in a different direction. And those are beautiful. And I think it was just reminding myself and seeing it of like the story God is writing in my life is just as worthy and beautiful. And there's going to be so many things that I've overcome or I've processed or um, been going in one direction and gone in the other that just aren't as like outward focused, right?
Yeah.
Like there's going to be things that maybe it's character development or maybe it's just like a habit that you're doing or it's yeah, just something that's not as outwardly expressed and it's just reminding yourself like we don't we have like this space where we can compare, but it's not healthy. Like it's not healthy to be comparing like the story God is writing in my life to the story that he's writing in someone else's. It's just like that's not a fair comparison because God is
Yeah.
this God that is so creative and so unique that he's writing a unique and beautiful story in all of our lives.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
And
good.
I wanted to share or circle back on something you said too of like your 20s being really hard and
Yeah.
challenging.
Yeah.
I always describe my 20s as like, wow, what a tumultuous and just like wild ride those were.
Totally.
Like, and I
Yeah.
think what is so helpful for me to think about is like, I feel like early on I kind of got this wisdom, or I don't know if someone said it or I kind of just thought about it, but like everything was brand new, right? Like, you move across the country and it's your first time needing to go book a dentist appointment for yourself, right?
Yeah.
Or like
Speaking
you,
of, speaking
yeah,
of, I need
yeah.
to do
Everyone go make a dentist appointment. I'm speaking to myself
that.
there as well.
Yeah.
Or for me, I remember I was living in Portland and I got into my first car accident and it was
Hmm.
minor. I was fine. I drove away from it, but it was that thing of like, oh my gosh, now I have to do this for the first time. I have to go and figure out car insurance. I need to take my car to an auto body shop and all of this stuff. And it's those little things that I feel like your 20s can be so tumultuous because everything you're doing it for the first time. You haven't done
Yeah.
it before, right?
Yeah.
And so it's
Totally.
like giving
Totally.
yourself so much grace to say like,
Yeah.
okay, I haven't made a dentist appointment by myself before, or I haven't done
Yeah.
X, Y, and Z before. And just saying like, okay, there's grace in that moment. And there's
Yeah.
grace throughout your 20s to say, it's going to be a wild ride and I'm going to buckle up for it because it's brand new. And how exciting is it that it's also brand new?
Yeah, totally. I saw a video the other day on TikTok. This guy said that when you're in your early 20s, you're pretty much just like a toddler adult.
Mm,
So, when you're 18, because not everyone moves out of home and moves to college and stuff when they're 18, but say, like, just for the sake of, being general, you're 18. So by the time that you're 20, you're only a 2-year-old adult. And by the time that I'm 23, I'm only a 5-year-old. I'm only technically 5. Um,
totally.
so it's like we're just baby adults still trying to figure
Yeah.
everything out. Um, and become independent and everything, leave the nest a little bit. So it's like you said, it's going to be a bumpy ride, but um,
Yeah.
buckle up.
Buckle up. And it's
I
so
know.
fun too. Like looking back on my 20s, I'm like, wait, that was so fun to move across the country and to do all the things that I got to do and do it alongside my friends and pour into a church. Like so cool and so fun. Um, but it was nothing like what I think I expected it to be, but also everything I needed it to be because I was able just to be like, this is new, doing it for the first time.
Yeah, totally. Well, thank you. I know that we want to
Yeah.
jump into more advice
Yes.
for our 20-year-old selves later on in the episode. Did you have anything else testimony-wise that you wanted to share
Ooh.
before we jump into your book?
No, I think that kind of covers it.
Okay. I actually would, I don't know, are you going to be talking about your whole, because you said you lived in Portland?
Oh, yeah,
Are you
I
going to be
did.
talking about that more when we get into like why you wrote your book and everything?
Ooh, yeah.
Or because I would also love to hear like why did you move to Portland? How was your
Yeah.
experience? Like how was that experience? All of that.
Yeah, I can dive into that a little bit more. Yeah, I'll dive into
Yeah.
that now and then we can chat more about the book.
Okay.
Yeah, so when I was in college, I where do I start? In college, I kind of had this sense of like, man, I don't really want to dive into the workforce right away. There's just something about it where I was like, I'm not I'm not ready to graduate college, 2 weeks later start a full-time job.
Yeah.
Um,
So
I
fair.
was a Bible camp yeah, I was a Bible
Yeah.
camp counselor throughout college, so I just had a lot of like camp counselor experience on my resume. And I just thought about it and I was like, okay, I'm gonna look into like doing a gap year program. And so through some friends and different mentors, I learned about this gap year program in Portland. And it was 9 months of living in intentional community. And so there was a house of 6 women, and there was a house of 6 men, and the house of guys like lived down the street from us. And for 9 months, we all had internships, like in a secular work environment. And then in the evenings, we would do Bible study together, or house meetings, or family dinners. Um, we had a day each week set aside for spiritual formation. And so it was this 9 month program that actually like gave me the work experience that I wanted while also giving me more language and tools for what Christian community looks like and how do we resolve conflict and how do we host and have people over to our houses and how do we enter into someone's home and be hosted well. Um, and in that program, I also just got a lot of like networking connections in Portland too. And so I, yeah, spent those 9 months there and just loved it. Fell in love with the West Coast and the mountains and the ocean and all of the greenery. So that was just like a really cool experience. And it gave me a lot of language for like, how do I want to be living my life? How do I want to structure my time? And so when that program wrapped up, then me and the girls that I was in a house with, we all decided to stick around Portland. We were from all over the country. We all decided to stay in Portland. And then that just started like 7 years there. And I loved it. So I had a bunch of different roommates throughout my time in Portland. And that was so fun just to live with different women at different times and in different parts of the city. And I really like started establishing my career, worked in some Christian nonprofit spaces, and then I ended up going to seminary when I was in Portland. So I earned my master's in ministry and leadership and then a certificate in life coaching. And seminary was just a really cool time for me to say, okay, let me study theology a little bit more. Let me write these papers. And I always try to make all my papers about like, what does this mean for my everyday life? What does this mean in this moment? Someone who isn't a pastor, someone who isn't like in a parachurch organization, how can we like really just be like living out our faith, these theological implications? What does that mean for our everyday life? And um, so yeah, so I did seminary and then trying to think of like categorically what comes next after that. Yeah, I just like loved my time in Portland, I would say. And then probably about a year and a half ago, kind of started getting this sense of, okay, I think my time in Portland might be done, but let me explore it a little bit more. And so ended up getting a fully remote job in kind of a corporate setting and moved back to Minnesota. And it was supposed to just be like 6 months. I was like, I'm going to bop around and hang out with my parents and travel a bunch and be with my sister as she has her first baby and all of this stuff. And now it's been about a year and a half. I've been back in Minnesota full time and just loving it. So that was my 7 years in Portland. It was so fun. And I feel like that was just a really formative time too. Also being involved in a church that I loved, like just diving in and being like, okay, I'm going to volunteer and I'm going to be present on Sundays. And I was in like a community group with that church. And so it was just a really formative season of life to live across the country and say, everything's new. Like we were just saying, your 20s are a crazy time, but also living across the country from your family, it opened my eyes so much more to different parts of the country and how even you're all like in the same country, but things can be so different. And the weather and the people and all of it. So it was just, I don't know how to summarize 7 years of life, but that was my 7 years of Portland.
Great. Okay, well, I want to jump into talking all about your book. Why'd you write it? What's it about? All of that stuff.
Yeah. So, back in college, I really enjoyed writing papers. And through a few different experiences, I just realized like, I would really like to write a book. I remember telling my dad that and feeling kind of like, that feels like a silly goal, kind of like who writes a book? But for some reason, little 20-year-old Heidi really wanted to write a book. But when I said that, and when I named that dream, I also realized like, I think I'm actually going to need to go and live it first before I just dive into writing about it. I need to live some life before I can before I can dive into actually writing about an experience. I need to have the pivotal moment. So throughout my early 20s and into seminary, I kind of had this in the back of my mind, like, I'd love to write a book one day. We'll see what it's about. And then in August of 2020, I was like randomly driving to a beach that's like just north of Portland. It's like my favorite swimming spot. And I turned on a podcast. Podcasts can change lives, people. I was turned on a podcast, and that's one of my friends had recommended. And it was this podcast of this like beautiful testimony from a woman of just all of the ways that God answered her prayer in really like big ways and also really small ways. And it was just so cool to hear. And I was driving and I was just bawling in my car. I was like by myself and I was just like weeping because I was so moved of, wow, God can do such cool things in someone's life. And when I like got to the beach and finished the podcast, I was sitting there and I realized that I had two conflicting thoughts in me. Okay, I like believe God can do big, impossible things, that we believe in a God who can go and move mountains and have people going in one direction and then shift them in another direction, right? I believe that God can go and do those things. Well, simultaneously, I had this belief that he just didn't want to do them in my life, that he could do them, but he didn't want to do them in my life. And I had that moment when I was just sitting there and I realized that, and I started shaking my head back and forth, literally. I was just like, that's a lie. Like, what am I thinking, God? No, God does want to do those things in my life. God can and wants to do that in my life. And that's when I thought of Hebrews 4:16, which says, let us approach God's throne of grace with confidence so that we can receive mercy and grace in time of need. Something like that. Don't direct quote me. But that's like generally.
I have it open if you want me to read it.
Oh, yes, read it. Hebrews 4:16. Let's hear it.
Yeah, because you had texted me that this was really like foundational to your book.
Yes.
So I just wanted to have it pulled up for the episode just in case. But Yeah, Hebrews 4, 14 through 16, it says, or was it just 16 or 14 through 16?
In that moment, it was just 16 that came to
Oh, okay.
mind, but
Okay.
yeah, read all of it.
Okay. So it says, therefore, since we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold fast to our confession. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who has been tempted in every way as we are, yet without sin. Therefore, let us approach the throne of grace with boldness, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's an
Oh,
awesome one.
I love that verse, that passage. Yeah. So when I'm like sitting on the beach and I'm realizing these thoughts, that verse came to mind, and it was that let us approach God's throne of grace with boldness, with confidence. And I thought to myself, like, what does that actually mean? What does that actually look like to approach with boldness, approach God with confidence? And I just started thinking about it, and then I made a list. I remember I very clearly made a list for God of like, these are all the things that I think are just impossible in my life that I don't think you want to like do anything with, but I'm going to approach with confidence. So I'm going to pray about them more. And so I ended up leaving the beach that day with this commitment. I said, I'm going to go and I'm going to pray for 30 days for these things. So the three areas that I felt God did not want to move in were my finances, getting a dream job, and then my desire to be married. I was like, God does not see those. He does not care about them. So I'm going to go pray. I'm going to go approach him with confidence. And I'm going to go pray for 30 days for these things. And spoiler alert, I say this in the book, those things did not change at all in 30 days from praying for those. But
Yeah.
how I approached God and my prayer life radically changed and pivoted in those 30 days. And so I started seeing that like in the first few days of prayer, of praying for those things, I was praying like, okay, God, change my finances. Okay, God, bring me my dream job. I don't know what it is, but bring it to me.
Yeah.
Okay, I'd love to be married. Let's see who it is. And those aren't bad prayers or bad ways to be praying, but I realized in that I didn't have this willingness to be vulnerable with God, to really like go for it and say like, this is how my finances are making me feel. When I'm wanting them to be moved and changed, this is what I mean by that, or this is what I need, or this is where I feel stuck, or this is where I don't feel like you see me. And in those 30 days, I just kind of went through this journey of, okay, I need to like release my expectations. I was expecting God to all of a sudden bring me this dream job that I had no idea what it was, that doubled my salary and fixed all my problems. God can do that. He totally
Mhm.
can. And also, let's get to the heart of why I wanted him to do that. Let's get to the vulnerability of why I felt like I needed that.
Yeah.
So in those 30 days, I just realized that there was such a greater invitation to be vulnerable with God in prayer. And that prayer wasn't just about asking God to fix these things. It wasn't just about asking him to fix the areas that I felt like he was ignoring, but it was actually to step closer into relationship with him around
Mm.
those areas of my life. And so in those 30 days, it was probably about halfway through when I realized like, this is so pivotal for me. I want to help other people have this kind of experience and this shift in their prayer life. And so, yeah, about halfway through, I was like, this is what my book needs to be about. And then, like, those 30 days ended, and I started kind of writing the book, outlining it. And then about 2 years went by where I just kind of worked on the book when I could. And as time allowed, working full time, I was in seminary, I had a life. And then it was about a year ago when I moved back to Minnesota and my capacity just shifted. I had a lot more time on my hands to be able to say, now's the time to write this book. And so it shifted from, originally I wanted it to be kind of like a devotional, but then it shifted into, I think, the stories around what I experienced in prayer. How did I pray about my finances? How did I pray about my desire to be married? How did I pray when so many things were still unanswered after so many years of praying for them? And so the book now is really just my honest stories and my honest thoughts about how I prayed for those things and kind of the surprising story God was weaving together. So the book is called Audacious, redefining the space between a bold request and an unimaginable answer. So the book is all about saying, hey, our boldness, our bold request, that's not defined by the circumstances that we want to see changed. Instead, it's defined by our vulnerability and our willingness to trust. And that our trust isn't just this free fall into the unknown, but our trust is this gritty resiliency in following Jesus. And then the unimaginable answer, it's really encouraging this element of surprise that I prayed for these things for so many years. And actually the ways that God has answered those prayers has been unimaginable in the sense of I couldn't have dreamed it up if I wanted to. And it's nothing like when I set out those 4 years ago now, when I was like, God, I want these 3 things changed. The answers to those and how I've seen those areas of my life are nothing like I could have dreamed up, but so much better than I could have imagined. And so the book is really this kind of arc of a story over those 3 years of praying for those things and how can we approach God with vulnerability. And so each chapter has stories and a few thoughts on that topic, and then ends with reflection questions. So it helps you actually say, okay, this is the story Heidi shared. These are Heidi's thoughts. What does this actually mean for my life? What does this actually mean for how I want to approach God with boldness? Or how do I want to approach God with my expectations or my lament or in my unanswered prayers? So that's the book. That's what it's about. It's been so cool to see the impact it's had on people. So my hopes and my goals for it are just to encourage people to read it, encourage people to send it to a friend that really feels like I have this impossible prayer and it doesn't feel like God is really paying attention to it. Send the book to them, read the book and say, okay, let's see what this unimaginable answer is, because it could be something that you can see right now or you can't imagine right now. But it's really that our prayer is not about having God fix something. Our prayers are this honest conversation with him.
Yeah, that's so good. It honestly sounds like even just being more intentional with the way that you like pray and approach, your conversations with the Lord. Because I was like you were just saying, podcasts can literally change lives and they're
Yeah,
so good. Like
totally.
that's why I'm so passionate about podcasting. I just love it so much. But I was listening to one this morning actually, which I think it's so funny how God shows up. Um, but I was listening to a podcast this morning. The podcast is called Christ with Coffee on Ice by Ali Yost. It's really, really good. And she was talking about being more intentional in the way that you pray. And I was like, wow, that is a really good point. Because a lot of the times, like you were saying, how you were like, okay, I'm going to pray for 30 days straight for a husband, for finances. But like what specifically, like, oh, I just want a husband.
Yeah,
I feel like a lot of us
totally.
girls pray that prayer. I just want a godly man. Um,
Yeah.
but like that's the thing about God is if it's in his will, you can ask it and you will receive it. So be more intentional in the way that you pray and honestly just like more specific too, not just saying like help me in my finances, but like you were saying, what specifically about your finances do you need God
Yeah.
to move in? So I think
Yeah.
that's something that I really need to get better at doing. And I'm going to take this as a sign from listening to that podcast episode today and now recording with you. I feel like I need to be a little bit more intentional with my prayers. But yeah,
Yeah. And
that's
I love the
awesome.
word intentional that you use too. Because I think something that I struggled with was believing sometimes, not always, but that prayer is like a formula that like, oh, if I just pray correctly, then I'll get what I'm asking for. And it's just remembering like that's not what prayer is about. Yes, be more intentional, be more vulnerable and honest in our prayer life. Take our prayer life seriously. Like that's our honest, vulnerable conversation with God right there. So take it seriously, but also remember like it's not a formula to follow. It's a relationship to abide in, It's
Yeah.
yeah, prayer is not a formula to follow. I think that's like the biggest takeaway. So I think remembering to be intentional, but also that, yeah, that it's a part of your life. Yeah.
I get
That's
it.
just,
I get what you're
you
saying.
get what I'm saying. You get what I'm
Yeah.
saying. Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
I think as far as like goals for the book, it's really I want the book to be a resource for people. I want it to be a resource for those who are maybe navigating that same lie that I was holding on to,
Mhm.
that like, oh, God can do really impossible things, but he just doesn't want to do them
Yeah.
in my life. That's really who the book is for. And I think also remember, this word audacious, it means a willingness to take surprisingly bold risks.
Mm.
And in that conversation about prayer and being intentional and not being a formula, it's also remember that like prayer takes this willingness to be vulnerable, and it takes this willingness for us to be transformed along the way as well. And so that's another thread throughout the book is, okay, when we're looking for that unimaginable answer, we're also having this willingness for us to be transformed along the way. So like one of the stories that I share about is around finances, and it's this like, okay, wow, I had a narrative in my mind that I just wasn't aware of, that my self-worth was really tied to my finances. And it was in my intentional and thoughtful prayers around it that I started naming that. And I hadn't really connected those dots, but it was through prayer and through that willingness to be vulnerable with God and to have the conversation that I was able to start seeing like, oh, I'm seeing how this greater narrative is all being connected. So I think the book it's about our boldness in prayer. It's about anticipating the surprise that God can do
Yeah.
in prayer, in our prayer life. Uh, but then it's also saying, I also need to be willing to change. I need to be willing to be transformed in Christ. It kind of goes back to our conversation about testimonies, right? It's like, really, we want to be transformed by Christ. That's not just happening in one moment. We are continually being transformed in our relationship with God every single day. We're choosing it and we're being transformed. And so it's remembering that also is, do I have this willingness in my prayer life that I'm not just coming with my list of things that I want changed, but I'm coming in with a willingness to be changed in the process.
Yeah, that's good. Um, Going back to that point that you were just saying, how the book is really meant for people who have that belief of that limiting belief of like, okay, I've seen Jesus work in other people's life, but it's not going to be that way for me. I'm not worthy. Whatever their beliefs are.
Yeah.
I feel like that can be me a lot of the time as well, because like you were saying, it's just that unbelief that you deserve. Like
Mm,
like not only um the gifts like that God wants to give us, but like the blessings and everything that we're um inheriting through being his children here on earth. And I feel like that I see that a lot with this podcast or social media things. You get it, like
yeah.
probably being an author and everything, like you have that comparison with
Mm-hmm.
other authors and like other books that are being sold. And with me, it's other podcasts, like I love listening to other podcasts and I love supporting them.
Yeah.
But still, at the end of the day, there's that comparison aspect where I look at other people and their social medias and I'm like, gosh, I have seen how God has blessed their podcast. I've seen how God has
Mm,
blessed their life. And I want to like spread it and have everyone listening to it and just build a beautiful community online. And I'm so excited to see like the fruit. I see the fruit already, but just to see like so much more growth over like the next couple of months and everything. But it's so hard sometimes to like not look at other podcasts who are like huge and doing live tours and selling out and just have
Yeah.
millions of listeners, millions of followers. And I doubt that like God could potentially get me there as well, you know? I see
Mm,
like the blessings that they've gotten through doing their ministry and through doing all these things, but I'm often like, that won't happen for me though. Like why would that
yeah.
happen for me? Um, so that's a good reminder. It's like God, he doesn't like have a closed fist when he gives. Like he's not a cheap.
Yeah.
He doesn't just give to a couple people here and there. He wants to bless all of us and all of us equally. The blessings will look different for all of us because we all have different gifts, we all have different skills, we all have different life callings, but
Hmm.
God still wants to bless us all the same. He's not blessing one person more than the next. Um, so that's just
Yeah.
something that I have to remember sometimes is like, no, like God has his blessings for me. He has a plan for my life, a will for my future. And I'll see it, I'll see the fruits one
Yeah.
day.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I think, you touching on your like heart for this podcast, and that's something we talked about before we pressed record. I
Yeah.
asked like, tell me more about the journey of this podcast and your heart
Yeah.
behind it. Like that's so helpful for us when we're talking, for me just to know like where are you coming from? And you are so passionate about it, and I love that. And I think hearing you talk about that, it kind of gets into that language of calling, right? And what are we called to? And I think, like I said, I wanted to write a book when I was 20, right? That's
Hmm.
when I like named that I wanted to write that. And it was throughout my 20s that dream planted and it grew. And I know that there was so much that I walked through that helped me figure out like, who am I becoming in this world? Who am I becoming for me to continue to step into that calling, right?
Yeah.
And how can I be really faithful in my seminary papers to prepare me for when I was going to write a book one day?
Yeah.
And so I think that is like what I would encourage you in. And I don't know if you need my encouragement, but I'm going to encourage you of
Go
like,
for it. Go for it.
continue to remember like, yeah, God places these callings in our lives, and it's about who are we becoming in the process of stepping into that calling. And also the fruit, you named that right at the end of
Yeah.
when you were talking, but like the fruit is going to be so much more important than how many listeners you have or how many books I sold. That was something that I was actually really intentional about. A lot of people, my first week when the book was out, so many people, a surprising amount. How many books have you sold? How many books have you sold? And I just decided to keep that number to myself. I was just like, for me personally, it wasn't about how many books I sold. It wasn't about um, how many people I reached, but for me it was okay, I listened to the thing God was calling me to, and I was
Yeah.
faithful in doing it. I was faithful to do it well, and to do it in a way also that was really authentic to Heidi, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
Jerica, you're going to be so successful in the podcast world when you do it really authentic to Jerica, when you
Yeah.
do it really authentic to Heidi. That was something I had to be like, okay, I'm writing this book. I'm not writing it so that I can mimic someone else or mimic the people that I really look up to, but I need to do it in a way that is authentic to me and to the gifts and the skills that God has given me. And so
Yeah.
it's remembering like it's about the fruit, but God is calling us to unique things. He's calling everyone listening to this podcast to something unique. And it's not about fulfilling that specific task, but it's about doing it in a way with the gifts and the skills and the resources God has given you to do it. So I
Yeah.
think that's been so helpful for me to be remembering like, yeah, man, I love this book. I want everyone to read it. Of course I do. You want everyone to listen to your podcast because we know the fruit that it's coming from. And I think we see the transformation in our own lives too, right? Like
Hmm.
I've been transformed by a podcast. I've been transformed by books, seeing and experiencing God through those avenues.
Yeah.
But it's remembering like, okay, I need to do it in a way that's authentic to me. and not just to do it to complete the task, but to live into the calling God has called me to.
Yeah, that's so good. Thank you. That was
Yeah.
encouraging. That was good. Um, I will say too, like something that's been helping me, like you were saying, even if, you didn't sell a lot of books or if I don't have as many listeners as other big podcasts have, stewarding what God has given you, like, I need to steward what God has given me,
Mm,
like, super faithfully and confidently in with the gifts that he's given me and, the amount of listeners that I have, the amount of followers that I have right now. I need to steward that passionately now, because when you do well with even if it's a little, with the little bit that God's given you, he gives you more. He blesses you with more as you
mm,
are faithful to him through that. So that's something that I'm really trying to do, is just instead of focusing on the numbers, just being like, you know what? I am going to just steward this podcast the best that I can and have fun with it and be faithful to God's plan with it, because I know that, like you said, there's that calling that's put on our heart. And for everyone listening to, it's not just about this podcast, it's not just about your book, but those are just our personal experiences. Maybe, it's a career
yeah.
or it's a relationship or something.
Yeah.
And you're looking at other people and you're comparing yourself, and it's like God has the same blessings for you that he
Yeah.
has for other people, and you will see them one day. Just steward what you have well, and faithfully.
Yeah.
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 Mhm.
A chapter in my book is about expectations and kind of rephrasing how we surrender our expectations. So, for me, it's been a helpful reframe to not say, I'm surrendering my expectations to God. I'm surrendering them with God. I am
Mm.
partnering with Him to surrender my expectations because I need His help to do that. It's not just something, I think oftentimes when I hear the phrase, surrender your expectations to God, it can be like, oh, cool, I'm supposed to just like drop them and then walk away and be fine.
Yeah.
I don't know
Like, how
about
do I
you,
do
but
that?
like, yeah, I overanalyze things. I have
Yeah.
plan A, B, C, D, E, F, G, like on my mind. Like
Totally.
that,
Yeah.
that is not easy for me to just be like, oh, I'm just going to drop everything, surrender it, and let go and walk away.
Yeah.
But instead, surrendering them with God and saying, okay, God, let's walk through what are my expectations. Okay, my expectation is that I'm going to have X amount of podcast listeners, or I'm going to sell X amount of books. Okay, walk through that with God and see where that leads you and surrender the expectations alongside Him. And for me, it's been so helpful just to say, okay, my expectation was never about how many copies of the book I was going to sell. My expectation was that it was going to be impactful for people. And I
Yeah.
just wanted, I've been able to hear so many cool stories of experiences that I don't even touch on in the book, right? Like,
Yeah.
talk about finances, job, and to be married. And people have messaged me and reached out saying, oh my gosh, this part of my life or this part of my life has been like impacted by reading that book. And it's so cool to consider and be like, okay, I surrendered my expectations with God, and I was
Yeah.
able just to say like, okay, I want you to help me define like what my expectation is and to be surprised and just say like, okay, surprise me, God, surprise me in what you're going to do, and not hold to a rigid, I need to sell this amount or I need to have everyone who has experienced the desire to be married to read this book and then be transformed by it. It's like, no, surprise me in how you're going to use this thing.
Yeah. Totally. And he will. God
Mm-hmm.
will. He will do crazy stuff out of, like you said, unimaginable.
Totally. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, awesome. I do want to say for everyone listening that Heidi has agreed to contribute a book or two
Two
to
books.
a
Yeah.
giveaway that I'm planning on announcing in early April is the plan, like that first or second
Mm-hmm.
week of April. I'm not gonna say what else is gonna be in it yet, but Heidi's book will definitely be included. So if you guys are
Yeah.
listening to this episode and you're like, oh, I want to get my hands on one of Heidi's books, because you should. They sound amazing. That will be in the giveaway.
In the
So keep
giveaway.
your eyes out for that, or go buy one too. Are they on
Yeah.
Amazon? What
Yes,
when
it's
you
on
show up?
Amazon. So it's called Audacious, redefining the space between a bold request and an unimaginable answer. So it's on
Yeah,
Amazon. It's on the link in my bio on Instagram if you just need to go find it there. But
yeah,
yeah,
perfect.
only $12.99. But yeah, I'm excited to be a part of that
Wow, look at that.
giveaway.
Yeah, yes,
Yeah,
the giveaway will be awesome. I'm super excited for everything that's gonna be in it, and it's
yeah.
gonna be a lot of
You
fun.
teased you teased a few of the items, and
Yeah.
I'm gonna have my eye on it. I'm gonna tell a lot of people to go enter that giveaway.
Oh yeah, for sure. I would love, I know we were talking about this earlier since, you are 30 and a lot of my listening demographic is in our early 20s or mid 20s.
Yeah.
I would love if you could just kind of jump into a time where you talk about any advice that you would give your 20-year-old self.
Yeah. I love this question. In like just being able to think about it for myself of, oh, what do I wish I would have known? So three things come to mind. First, kind of touched on this already, but I wish I would have known in my early 20s that following Jesus takes a lot of grit and resiliency. I think, like I said, we kind of already touched on it, but I just feel like I wish I would have known that, or had more language. I guess maybe that's what I would have phrased it as, of more language for like, gosh, yeah, following Jesus is hard. Like,
Yeah.
it takes a lot of choosing it every day. It takes discipline. It takes um, intentionality in what you're thinking about or your choices and your decisions. And it takes grit. So it takes this like um, commitment and resolve. It takes commitment and just like a dedication to going in the same direction over a long period of time.
Yeah.
And I think that that's what I would like encourage people to remember. Like, okay, if you're like navigating through something and you're clinging to Jesus in it, it's like, yeah, that the following Jesus amidst that moment is going to be hard. Following Jesus isn't just this like romanticized, soft, gentle thing. Like I said, God is all those things, but following him, it can feel tumultuous at time. It can feel hard or questioning where you're like, where is God in this moment? And I think I wish I would have had some more language to describe that. Otherwise, for me, when I first started experiencing those types of things or that part of following Jesus, it was a little bit like, am I doing something wrong? Like what is happening here? But just to remember like, oh yeah, it is going to be hard. Like it's not just going to be rainbows and butterflies and sunshine the whole time.
Yeah.
So I
I love
wish
that you
someone
touched
would
on
have
that.
told me that.
Yeah, I love that you
Yeah.
touched on that because I feel like so many people almost, like you were saying, like romanticize it and make it seem like it's something that comes so naturally and um,
Yeah.
is easy peasy, but it really does take those conscious choices every single day.
Mm-hmm.
And those choices oftentimes go against what the world is telling us to do, which make them
Yeah.
very difficult. It goes against
Mm-hmm.
what your flesh wants to do because we are sinners,
Yeah.
to our core, we are sinners. So
Mm-hmm.
it is a choice that you have to make every single day actively too. Like you can't just wake up and be like, I'm gonna follow Jesus today. No, like that takes follow through in your actions, like you were saying.
Yep.
Like literally every step that you take, you have to be like, okay, what would Jesus do? How am I gonna
Yep.
be, a believer through this? Things like that. Hmm.
Yeah. Yep. So the second thing that I think I would want someone to have said to me or advice or I wish I would have known kind of plays off of that one. In your 20s are a time to really ask this question of who am I becoming? And in Galatians 5, we read of the fruits of the Spirit. And those are those character traits that are an outflow of life with the Spirit and life with following Jesus. So love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Fruits of the Spirit. But to be asking yourself, who am I becoming? Am I becoming more like Christ through these experiences? And I think that has been a really helpful question for me to be asking in a workplace or when you are in a dating relationship, when you're in a friendship, when you're making big decisions about where you want to live. It's kind of asking this question of like, who am I becoming in this process? Who am I becoming when I make this decision or when I'm in these types of conversations? And be considering like, how am I becoming more like Christ with these, like in this setting? And I think in the same vein, it's considering, who am I in this big world, right? We've said it before, but like your 20s are like a tumultuous time, or they're challenging. They feel a little bit like everything's new, I'm figuring it out. So I wish someone would have said like, Heidi, what a cool opportunity you have. You're figuring out who you want to be in this world. You're figuring it out, right? It's your first time navigating some of these things. And I wish someone would have said, or if I could go back and just be like, take it as a chance to be thinking, who am I becoming? Am I becoming more loving, more joyful, more patient, more self-disciplined? Am I becoming those things in this process? Or am I becoming something that isn't Christ-like, or something that I'm not proud of, or something that is like a little complacent? Like, who am I becoming in this process? And just kind of have that question in the back of my mind was really helpful when I started thinking about that in my mid-20s. So I would say, ask yourself, like, who am I becoming? So that is the second point. And then the third one is very specific, but I think maybe it might speak to a few of the listeners here. I wish someone in my early 20s would have said, Heidi, your singleness is not a problem to solve. And I think for a long time in college and in my early 20s, I kept thinking of me being single as a problem. Oh my gosh, something's wrong with me, or oh, this is an area of life that I need to fix. I need to date someone, I need to get married. And it was viewed for a while as like, oh, this is a problem with me. This is a problem in my life. And that's just not the case. That is just so not the case. So if you are single and you are listening, like, that's not a problem to solve. It's a season of life to fully and beautifully embrace, to consider who am I becoming in my singleness? Who am I still becoming as a follower of Jesus? I think that is something that's been really helpful for me to remind myself, like, yeah, I am following Jesus, whether I am single, whether I'm dating, whether I'm married. Like, me following Jesus isn't going to change, no, even if my relationship status does. And so be remembering, this isn't a problem to be solved, but a season of life to like fully embrace and to step into. And you can still fully follow Jesus, even if you are single, fully see the fruit of your calling, even if you are single. And it's not something that has to be solved or fixed, because nothing's broken. Nothing's broken if you're single. So I really wish I would have heard that when I was in my early 20s, because I think I spent a long time being like, oh my gosh, if I just get this one area of life figured out, then everything else will fall into place. And so I could say so much more about singleness, but that I think is really what I want people to hear, is like, no, if you're in a season of singleness, like, embrace it. Like, keep seeking after Jesus. Keep figuring out, who am I becoming in this world? There's nothing wrong with you. It's a season of life, and it's a beautiful and good and rich and fun season. So like, fully embrace it and step into it.
I love that. Thank you. I feel like a lot of women in their early and mid 20s need to hear that. All of those things. But specifically the singleness thing, I feel like that is a big thing that I see a lot, in especially in the Christian community, of women who are just like, why haven't I found my husband yet? And they pray for it and pray for it, and it doesn't happen. So yeah, thank you for touching on that. All right. Well, I almost forgot. I don't want to forget to ask you how you've seen Jesus in your week so far.
Yes. Oh, good question. I was giving some thought to it, and I think really seeing Jesus through some of my friendships. So a majority of my like closest friends are all like long distance friendships. So people on the West Coast, people in California and down south, and people all over the country. And so a lot of my friendships are like in like just sending voice notes and voice memos to people. And so There's a specific group text that I have with a few gals who we just talk about all things like stepping into our calling, dating, and fully just like living bold, beautiful lives when we're in our late 20s and early 30s. And so I think I've just so seen Jesus in that group text this week and encouraging one another and affirming one another, and just really grateful to have people who are in a similar season and stage of life as me who are also really committed to saying, yeah, I'm following Jesus. I'm going to fully embrace and honor God in my life. And so, yeah, that's where I've seen him this week.
Awesome. Is there anything else before we close up? Because we are about to end the episode. Is there
Ooh.
anything else that is on your heart right now that you just want to share
Hmm.
with the sisters in Christ that are listening right now?
I think just on the topic of prayer, fully embrace it, enter into it, be vulnerable with God in prayer. And remember that prayer is that honest conversation with him. And he wants to do the impossible, crazy cool things in your life. Um, he wants to and he can. And so just step
Yeah.
into that relationship of prayer with vulnerability and trust.
Yeah. He is more than able.
He is.
He is more than able.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Heidi. I have really enjoyed this conversation. I feel like you just, there's just going to be so much fruit to come from this conversation. I just
Mm-hmm.
know this probably spoke to so many girls as it spoke to me today. I feel so encouraged and excited, honestly, for this upcoming week and for everything, and to read your book. Of course, I'm so excited for that. So
Yeah.
yeah, thank you for
Thanks,
being
Jerica.
vulnerable and coming on and sharing your story.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. Loved it. So fun to chat with you.
What an amazing episode, you guys. I am so excited again that it popped back up in my recordings, that God found this episode for us, because I feel like it's just going to bless so many people. And I'm so glad that you guys were able to hear it and to listen to it this Wednesday. Again, about the giveaway, Heidi is graciously giving 2 books. We're not going to have 2 winners, but there will be 1 winner. And like Heidi was saying in the episode, this is a perfect book to share with a friend, to share with a family member, maybe a sister, your mom, a cousin, a best friend, a sister in Christ who needs to hear this message that Audacious has to offer. Like you guys heard in today's episode, it's just an amazing book. I am so excited myself to go and purchase a copy. And read it, especially after hearing Heidi's heart posture behind this book and the goals that she has for the readers. I just feel like I need to go buy a copy and read it myself. So if you guys want to get your hands on one, it's in Amazon to purchase, and it's only $12, which is very cheap. That is a steal, honestly. But I am also going to be doing a giveaway, I want to say in about 2 weeks from this episode being uploaded. So definitely keep an eye out for that. That'll be announced on my Instagram and my TikTok. So definitely be following me on there if you want to be a part of the giveaway. It's not just this book, it's going to be a lot of really good things. So definitely keep your eye out for that. So I am so glad that you guys were able to join me for today's episode. Definitely keep an eye out for that giveaway. And then next week, I have another amazing, incredible guest. You guys will never guess who it is. She is so amazing, and I am so freaking excited to have her on and for you guys to get to hear about her testimony. We're going to dig into social media next week. So if you guys want to join, I hope that you do. Of course, as always, I can't wait to talk to you guys next Wednesday. I love you so much. But most importantly, Jesus loves you. Bye.